Hey everyone, welcome back to the product briefing show of the Hun Club podcast. Today we are going to talk about different security challenges in securing Azure cloud. My name is Tiff from product marketing, and I'm joined by Akash from our product management team. Akash, why don't you give everyone an introduction of yourself?
Cool. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I'm part of the product management team here at Vectra. Fundamentally, I work on our cloud and identity products. Day in, day out, I work with our data science and security research teams to evaluate the threat landscape and figure out how we best build coverage in the cloud and identity world. I also work a lot with our engineering and UX team to deliver that value to customers and then get feedback from our customers and share that with the teams internally. Nice to be with you.
Amazing. Really great to have your perspective here today. So, Akash, I'm going to have a few questions for you to it. So my first question for you is, why is securing the Microsoft environment so challenging nowadays?
Yep. Yeah, this is an interesting question because we get that very, very often from our customers. Uh, Before I dive into Microsoft, I'll quickly touch on how Vector views the world, right? And it's one that's highly connected. Traditionally, it involves multiple surfaces, and attackers find ways to access one and move to everywhere else. Interestingly, you'll see in this graphic that a lot of the surfaces have Microsoft involvement. The data center has it, cloud identity has it, the cloud data center has it, our SaaS applications have it. And so fundamentally, if you are a Microsoft customer, you're using a lot of what they have to offer in the enterprise realm. And that's sort of what leads to problems, is because you have all these different surfaces to protect. So what we see is attackers come in, hijack one surface, and then use means to pivot from that surface to another, eventually moving towards things like the cloud. Azure cloud is highly lucrative, right? There's endless and breadth of services. Azure cloud has over 200. And the interesting thing is across this entire kill chain, representation of Mango Sandstorm, which is a very popular APT group, an attacker needs just one opening. I often say this to our
Mhm.
customers is as defenders, we have to be always right. An attacker has to be
Mm,
right only once, right? And so
yeah.
that's what makes this surface quite challenging to protect.
Yeah, and I think
Uh,
a lot of our customers also tell us that it's not they sometimes use different silo tools to monitor different attack surface, but that also create blind spots for them, and that's why we see the importance of interconnectivity and the visibility of all of those attack surface in one, to give the best defense.
Absolutely, right? When it comes to investigating and response, having that connected visibility is crucial as opposed to having siloed visibility in one surface alone.
Yeah.
Um, the Azure cloud has sort of been a big area of research for us, right? And it helps to understand
Mhm.
sort of why. I think some of the high level stats here are that a lot of our customers are moving to Azure cloud. As I have more conversations, I see more adoption, especially post COVID, where a lot of deployments are now moving in a lift and shift manner to Azure cloud. And then folks are also, as they mature, deploying natively. Interestingly, as you deploy in Azure, what we're seeing is our customers are using a lot of hybrid services. Microsoft incentivizes this, and so our customers are deploying more and more hybrid.
Mhm.
And finally, the number of attacks in this surface are growing, right? So
Mhm.
the security budgets are growing, folks are investing more, but attacks are still moving at a very significant pace in Azure. Uh, Tiff, are you hearing this from our customers as well, from industry experts? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. Loads of Azure migration happening, but at the same time, security teams sometimes feels like they're left behind because it's the company's decision to move to the cloud. But then there are loads of stuff that they need to go figure out in a relatively very short period of time. And there's sometimes some silos as well between teams. Like this, the security teams don't necessarily need know what all the cloud teams are doing. So it's very hard for them to gain visibility beyond that.
Yep. Yeah, it's very true. And like if we double click into the last one here, which is around the attacks themselves, I think over the last couple of years, we're seeing this huge proliferation of attacks against cloud environments, but that don't often start in the cloud. So if you look at like the midnight blizzards of the world, Mango Sandstorm, Peach Sandstorm, Blue Bleed, these are attacks that often start in environments that are outside the cloud and move into the cloud, where impact is then taken. And the impact is not small, right? I think this is a number we've seen float around in terms of the damage financially to an organization that's been compromised, not to mention the non-monetary or measurable impact, things like reputation. That's quite critical, right? And so my big takeaway here for customers that deploy in the cloud is a critical need for deeper cloud resilience in a world that's connected in that modern network world. How do we strengthen coverage for the cloud, right? That's the problem we've been investing a lot to try and solve.
Yeah.
Cool. And so I think it helps to understand why this is so challenging today.
Mm-hmm.
In Azure itself, I think we've seen in our research, there's several different forms of logs that are made available. Activity logs, which are orchestration level logs, management resource logs, which are data plane level logs. Hard to get, hard to read, and hard to use is what I have listed here. They're highly a la
Mm-hmm.
carte. Our customers have sort of checkboxes that they have to go and use
Mm-hmm.
in the Azure CLI, in the Azure Resource Manager to enable these. A lot of the time, these logs are not standardized and missing important context. I'll give you an example here in a second. And sometimes they're not available at all, right? Oftentimes with things like Copilot, where capabilities front run auditability, we're seeing fast moving development, but from a security lens, there's still a lot to hope for. So an
Mm-hmm.
example here is like the team ran an operation in Azure Cloud, and we
Mm-hmm.
used three different destinations for the metadata. So in the first case, we sent it to a storage account. Second, via REST API, the logs were collected. And third, via log analytics.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see the comparison here, which is one log event, three different destinations, and three different outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And what this goes to show us is that some of the design decisions that are being made in Microsoft land are not gelling well with defenders because now we have to think about how to manage these inconsistencies that are present in the metadata, making DIY very, very hard in Azure Cloud.
Yeah, definitely. And it all creates additional time and effort that the defenders need to do to stitch together all of these different, even account names. Like to double click on what you said about hard to read, I remember talking to a customer and he was saying, I'm a human, give me a human name, don't give me a 65 character long alphanumerical ID. It is very hard for him. It takes time for him to go through four different portals to stitch together this to find out the original compromised account. So that all takes time. And we know that in cloud attacks, the only thing we don't have is time. Once the attacker is in, it's like very fast.
100%. And I'll echo that, right? Like we see these problems that you've just highlighted in a lot of some of the native tooling that's provided, where there's obviously a question of the quality of alerts. Are you catching the right behaviors? But there's also a deeper question of, okay, once you've surfaced something, how do I
Mm,
actually understand it and action it? And you mentioned identities, right? So in this example, we sort of highlighting what identity we get in the metadata. And like you mentioned, it's an alphanumeric string. As a defender, to me, this is not very useful. I need to figure
mm,
out who to go talk to, who to ask the question of were you doing this? Was this legitimate activity? And to do that today, I have to use this alphanumeric GUID, go to my Entra ID or IDP provider, and sort of
mm,
get that human readable name, come back, continue my investigations. And this is for one event. So if I'm
yeah.
scaling this to, let's say, 1 million events in my enterprise a day,
Mm,
and we see a ton more in enterprise size deployments, a SOC team is just going to be spending hours in doing just this,
yeah.
right? So it's highly inefficient. And then what this means is increased times to investigation, increased times to response, which is the last thing you want when you're in a potentially active incident.
Mm.
Cool.
So my next question with you for you, Akash, is that with all these challenges that we mentioned, so what coverage do you think defenders need to properly secure their Microsoft environments?
Yep. Um, Another good question. As I think about this and I speak with our customers, I like to talk about what good coverage means to us, right? As a security vendor, it helps to lay the groundwork there. The first thing is coverage for real world attacks. The second is protection for advanced hybrid threats. And the third is visibility into lesser known techniques. So, on the first pillar, we want to make sure that if there has been a real world compromise, we've been talking about some names on this podcast, Midnight Blizzard, Indrik Spider, Pete Sandstorm. We want to make sure these techniques that we've seen are modeled in a way that if they happen in your environment, we can detect them. The second pillar
Mm,
is hybrid threats, right? So we spoke about attackers jumping from one surface to another, making sure
mm,
we catch that movement off that those pivots. But also something that's more insidious and sinister is attackers using services within Azure Cloud to interact across Azure and on-prem environments. So like orchestrating VMs in your on-prem environment. So hybrid visibility is quite key because today everybody is deploying hybrid and very few are deploying cloud native alone. And the third is we want to front run attackers, right? Like we're not trying to build for things we've only seen happen in the wild. We want to predict. And that's the whole point of having a security research organization is ensuring that we're providing coverage for those things that we think will happen in the future and where attackers are moving to next. And that's very, very important for us. So pretty much everything I discuss is sort of rooted in real world compromises, right? Like we have this mechanism of attack anatomies that we use at Vectra. If you've seen other podcasts, you've probably seen this. These are us showing attack progressions and sort of how we
yeah.
would provide coverage against them. So all
Mhm.
examples of the research we've done are rooted in these. Um, Overall, making sure that we have coverage for real world attacks, the names you see here, making sure we have coverage for the hybrid pivot. And we'll discuss some of those use cases in future podcasts. And then finally, making sure that attacks that are novel are covered because those are either inadequately or not covered at all elsewhere.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh, so
So
yeah,
yeah,
go on.
moving on, like from our conversation, what are the three takeaways here, Akash, that you want to audience to remember?
Yeah, as I talk with more of our customers, the big takeaways here are Azure Cloud is highly lucrative, right? We've discussed how folks are moving to Azure Cloud, attacks are proliferating in Azure Cloud, very, very meaningful for an attacker to get access because they know there is impact and damage to be done there.
Mm,
The second is that attacks are hybrid and techniques are democratized. So you may have heard of like scattered spider, folks are being arrested, but the techniques we've seen scattered spider use are now being used by other groups out there.
mhm.
And the question is, once they're out there, they are sort of an open playbook for everybody to use. So how do
Yeah.
we make sure we are scaling the coverage we provide to secure
Hmm.
against those?
Yeah.
And I think the final one is we've highlighted some of the problems with the metadata, turning them on, aggregating them, enriching them with the right context, which is not always available.
Mm,
DIY from a threat detection perspective is really, really hard to do and do right in Azure. I'll take this a step further and say doing it right in Azure in the context of the modern network, incredibly
mm,
hard to get right at scale.
yeah.
And that's something that we've spent a lot of time in trying to solve here at Vectra.
Yeah, definitely. Well, all we do is that we hope to minimize the time that you need to detect and respond and investigate a threat so that you can spend more time doing other important stuff instead of looking at false positives, etc. And one thing about the coverage that I learned in my time in Vectra is that we don't only publish it like out of box detection and that's done. We always iterate like based on our research on looking at what the attack techniques are out there and we continue to iterate that coverage so that we make sure that our customer has the most updated and best coverage that they can have.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you so much, Akash. Super happy to sit down and talk about Azure with you. And thank you for tuning in as well. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to give us a like, comment, let us know what you think, and subscribe to our channel. And you haven't already, do check out our other episodes in this channel. There are loads of good content here. And with that, this is the wrap of this episode. Thank you so much for being here with us, and we'll see you in the next one.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, Tiff.
Thank you.